everyone. So today we're going to work a little bit through opening up through hands, shoulders, kind of thoracic spine, and getting back into our little bit of the spinal roll work that we did last week. Let's get started. So I'm going to start in a kneel. We can do this standing, deep kneel position. Working spread hands first. So I want to extend the elbows fully down by the side, and we're spreading our hands out as wide as possible. I'm really trying to get pinky and thumb spread wide, getting as much opening so that you feel that stretch throughout the hand. At the same time, extending the elbows fully, starting just straight at the side. Feel your chest kind of nice opened up towards the ceiling, tall spine. And we're going to start with spirals, spiraling the palms all the way up and open as far as you can, feeling that all the way up into the shoulder joint, and then internally spiraling as far as you can. I'm not letting my shoulders round. I'm keeping my chest open so that this spiral action is kind of isolated specifically at the shoulder joint itself, not getting any extra movement through the thoracic spine. And I want to work on, as we're doing this spiral, internally rotating as far as you can while maintaining that spread hands, nice and wide. Notice if there's a difference on how this feels on the right shoulder compared to the left shoulder. Does one side open up a little bit more comparatively to the other side? Is one side a little tighter? Or does one side internally rotate more than the other? Then we're going to bring hands straight out in front, doing the exact same thing, keeping that nice wide spread, spiraling all the way up, keeping those elbows actively extended, and then spiraling all the way in as far as you can. Keep the hands spread out wide. Notice if this particular position feels different than when we were down by our side. Does one shoulder feel different than it did before? Are you feeling the different tension patterns on one side compared to the other? Continue to really focus on maintaining that actively extended elbows. Don't let the elbows get passive and bendy. Want to keep that extension with the fingers spread nice and wide. Then we're going to come straight out to the side, doing the exact same thing. Spread hands, spiraling both hands together, all the way in, all the way out. If you find that this particular position of the shoulders is painful, like there's a little impingement pain, then it's okay to drop them down just a little bit to keep them out of pain. Otherwise, I want to try to keep as parallel to the shoulders as possible. And after we do about 5 spirals where we're moving the hands together, I then want to go oppositional. Spiral one inward as you're opening the other. And you're trying to rotate through and going back and forth. This is where I want to start to think like from fingertip to fingertip. We're a wet washcloth, and we're starting to wring out that washcloth. I'm still keeping the chest open. Shoulders are not rolling into this just yet. We're going to change that a little bit. But see how much can you feel that big stretch through the hand, forearm, elbow, up to the shoulder. And then we can start to allow those shoulders to round and roll. As I internally spiral, that shoulder blade can start to roll up, shoulder starts to roll forward, a little bit of contortion in the spine, and then the same thing through the other side. I still want to be reaching out away, actively straight through the elbows as we're spread wide and getting that nice stretch all the way across up into the upper shoulders. And then we'll shake the hands out a little bit, and we're gonna grab our staff, do a little bit of shoulder mobility on top of that. So we'll start with a nice close grip. This is where I want to think about bending the staff, like I'm trying to break it in two. I want that bend to come not just at the wrist. I want to feel the elbows spiral upwards towards the ceiling, and the shoulder blades kind of packing down, tightening down, like they're moving towards the back hips. And then from here, we're going to get a little scoop of the pelvis, tucking the tailbone underneath. Feel the core a little bit tense, and I want to maintain that scoop as we bring our elbows up towards our ears. Continue to bend the staff, keep the elbows straight, wrists straight, and squeeze. How far back can you bring your elbows to ears without pain? We'll inhale, let the hands come forward, and exhale, squeeze back. And I want to pulse back and forth. Very active with our bending of the staff, elbows extended actively. Inhale as you go forward, exhale as you squeeze. See if you can get a little further back on each one. I want to make sure we're not using momentum. I'm not throwing my arms back. I want to squeeze back. And I want to make sure we're maintaining this scooped pelvis. If we lose that pelvis, we're going to end up sticking the rib cage out, getting nice and hyperextended in the back. And I want to prevent that by scoop and squeeze. After about 10 of those, I want to keep my hands up high. We're going to reach up, allowing the shoulder blades to move up towards the ears, getting as high with our hands as possible. And we're going to keeping that scoop of the pelvis, doing the exact same thing. Reaching back with the elbows. Exhale, squeeze. Inhale, let it come forward. Make sure we are not moving into painful positions. With the elevated scapula, you should be able to get a little bit more range of motion on this, so kind of play with that without forcing it. And then we'll bring our arms down, move the staff behind, flipping our grip so our palms are facing backwards, still bending the staff, so feel that spiral of the elbow pits and notice how that opens up the chest. Now I'm less worried about the pelvis, the scoop of the pelvis, as we start to lift elbows up towards the ceiling. Again, nice squeeze at the end. Inhale, let it soften. Exhale, squeeze. With each one, we're seeing if we can squeeze a little higher. You can also feel that your sternum moves forward. See if you can feel that chest opening up as you lift elbows up at the same time. After about 10 up to 20 reps of those, we can flip our palms the opposite direction. So my palms are now facing forward, but I'm still spiraling elbows forward, bending the staff away from the body, opening up the chest, and lift the elbows up and squeeze at the top. Again, finding that nice inhale, softening, exhale, lift and squeeze. And see if you can open up your chest towards the wall in front of you on each one. As you lift, feel that chest open, like your sternum is moving forward and the chest is spreading. Should be a nice little stretch in there. Mild stretch, hopefully not massive. Again, I want to make sure we are avoiding pain. Next, we'll take our hands as wide as we can on the staff. And this is where we just want to go through our nice skin the cat movement. Coming up and seeing how far can you come up and around. And if you can, without pain, can you go all the way through? And then all the way back. Now, if you can't go all the way through, only bring it as far back as you can, kind of that nice squeeze into it without pain, and then all the way forward. On this one, I want to make sure that we have a good smooth movement all the way through, that you're not walking one side through and then the other side. So if you get to that where you feel like you got to walk it through, that's your end. Find that spot, squeeze into it with both hands together, and then bring it all the way back forward. Then we'll set the staff back off to the side, and we're going to come down into our quadruped position. Again, spreading fingers out nice and wide, grounding palms, extending the elbows fully. Taking some nice deep breaths in and out, and we'll start to load our wrists, lightly rocking forwards and backwards, feeling into the wrist space. Now, since we started out with the spread hand work, I will be curious if, as you're getting into your wrist mobility, if this feels a little different than it normally does. Do they feel a little looser, especially if this is the first time that you're doing wrist mobility today? My wrists feel like nothing like my normal first few reps of wrist mobility. They feel nice and warmed up, opened up. Feels really good right now, actually. After about 10, turning fingers out to the side and getting our side-to-side glide. Again, I want to feel that nice push, pull through the palms and feel the shoulder blades sliding and gliding along the rib cage. See if you can feel some movement and stretch between the shoulder blades as you push side to side. Again, notice the difference of the right wrist and left wrist. Is one side stiffer, achier, less mobile? Do you feel it more to the thumb side of the wrist? Do you feel it more to the pinky side of the wrist? Do you feel it on the back of the palm side of the wrist, or do you feel it on the front of the palm or the back of the palm side of the wrist? All of those are pretty helpful bits of information. Next, we're going to turn fingers all the way back towards the knees. Again, the closer the hands are to the knees, the less intense this is. The further out we come, the more intense. I don't want this to be massively intense. And then from here, palms loaded, just lightly rocking back hips to heels. Get nice, good, deep breaths in and out. I want to notice how this feels in the forearm. I want to notice how it feels in the elbow. And I want to notice how it feels at the wrist. Then next, we'll flip the palms upside down to the back side. Let the elbows bend on this. This position tends to be uncomfortable to start with. And we're going to press through the palms to extend the elbows. Notice if there's any stretch at that elbow joint as you extend. I don't want to go to pain. And then we'll let it soften and bend and move right back into that extension. With each one, I want to see if we can get a little further, more extension without forcing it. Moving into that stretch, seeing if the joint will mobilize more to give us a little bit more range without going into discomfort. If you're able to get the elbows fully extended, then we can start to rock back hips to heels. Again, feeling that wrist space, noticing the elbow joint as well. Comparing how does it feel on the right side related to the left side. Then we'll roll the wrists out a little bit, give them a little bit of flow. We'll come right back to it. Spreading fingers wide again. And now I want to come back to our elbow spirals, similar to what we did when we were doing our spread hands and bowls of soup work. So grounded palms. I want to look at spiraling through our elbow joint. Let that elbow spiral as far forward as you can. See if you feel some stretch down into the wrist or up around the shoulder. And then spiraling internally as far as you can. going back and forth between the two. And as we're doing this, I want to start to imagine that the long arm bones are a big screwdriver, and the palm of the hand is the head of a screw. As the elbow pits spiral forward, notice how that kind of screws the hand into the floor, like it locks it down without the hand sliding around. As we internally spiral, it's almost kind of like it unscrews a little bit. I want to notice that same type of action happening at the shoulder blade. As we screw the hands into the floor, the shoulder blade packs down on the rib cage like it's screwing into the ribs. And then as we internally spiral, it floats up and kind of rounds up just a little bit. And we can accentuate that now a little bit. As we spiral elbows pits forward, feel those shoulder blades lock down into the ribs. And as they spiral internally, allow the shoulder blades to come up and spread. And you can push your spine up towards the ceiling and see if you can feel a stretch right between the shoulder blades. And then spiral back, feel the shoulder blades pack. Spiral in and get that nice spread, pushing into the floor. Feel that nice big stretch. And again, we'll come off the floor a little bit, roll the wrists out. We're going to spend a little bit more time on the wrist, and then we'll give them a break for a moment. But I want to make sure that we are not overloading the wrists. So as we come back, nice spread. I want to spiral elbow pits so that they're facing forward, and I want to keep them there. And now we're going to move our pelvis. So I want to get some nice pelvic tilts, starting with a little bit of a scoop, scooping pelvis in, and then anteriorly tilting the pelvis so you feel the belly kind of open up to the floor. We're going to get into a little sway in the low back, and then getting a scoop. I want to see if we can feel some stretch in our low back. Now we got our elbow pits spiraled forward, which should lock the shoulders down. So I don't want a whole lot of movement in the upper back right now. I want to keep the upper back still as we're just working on scooping, going anterior and posterior with our pelvic tilt. And I want to start adding in our breath as we do this. So as your pelvis tilts down towards the floor and you feel the belly open up, I want to breathe into the belly space and feel that inhale inflate the belly, the abdominal space. And as we exhale, draw your navel into your spine as you scoop. Notice how connecting your breath with the tilt of the pelvis kind of accentuates it. You're able to get a little bit more mobility. Do you feel that create more stretch in the low back? And if you do, notice where you feel it. Is it more on the right side than the left side? Is it at a particular level of your spine? Maybe right at the sacrum L5, maybe up around the base of the ribs in the first lumbar, or somewhere in between. See if there's a particular spot that you could put a finger on that you notice where it feels a little tight and restricted compared to the rest of the space. And now I want to start to open up the rest of the spine. So as we scoop, we can start to let the elbows internally spiral, pressing to the floor, let the head come down like we're trying to touch our tailbone and our forehead at this imaginary point in the middle. And then as we anteriorly scoop, spiraling the elbow pits forward, let the chest kind of drop down to the floor as the shoulder blades pack and the head comes up last. Moving back and forth. With each one, see if you can get bigger and bigger into this kind of cat position, scooping the pelvis, actively reaching forehead. Can you feel this length from the sacrum all the way up and through to the base of the skull? And as we spiral out, letting the pelvis tilt forward, can you feel some length and load through the front of the abdominals and even across the front of the chest as the sternum reaches down to the floor. Again, let's come off the wrists a little bit, roll them out, make sure that they're not getting too much load. You should feel kind of good at this point. We're going to come back to wrist one last time so we can get into our feet. So tucking the big toes, just getting into our nice, simple, letting the hips sink back into heels, specifically focusing on the big toe joint. As we inhale, we can let our hips come forward a little bit. Exhale, see if you can sink the hips a little deeper. With each one, as you come up, you can even pull the toes in just a little more so that as you sink back, are you able to get a little bit more mobility range out of the big toe joint? Notice the difference between the left side and the right side. Does one toe feel like it's able to go a little further? Does one side feel tighter and more restricted? On the next one, as we sink back, we're going to let the heels start to windshield wiper all the way out and back in like you're trying to touch the heels together and rolling them out like you're trying to touch the floor with the heels. See if you can get that pinky toe tucked underneath as well so that we get that mobilization all the way through the joint ball of the foot. And notice how the stretch feels going to the lateral edge of the arch of the foot. How does it feel on that outside edge of the foot? How does it feel on the right side compared to the left side? It's a great place to kind of notice some differences in how your foot interacts with the ground with every step that you take. All right, so we can now come off our wrists for a little bit, give them a break, and we're going to get into our V-sit position. Now with V-sit, if you have tight and painful hips, I want you to modify how wide you go. I only want to go as wide as we can without this being painful. So we're finding a nice comfortable spread. I want to actively reach the knees down towards the floor. We're actively straightening the knees. We're pulling the dorsum of the foot, the top of the foot, like you're trying to fold your foot back to touch your shins. And I want to keep that active. And one last little cue is I like to imagine my heels are the roots of a tree and they're reaching out to spread out. I want to have this kind of action going out so that I feel my hip, deep in that hip socket, it's kind of like it's getting space. It's kind of opening up, getting some gapping in there. Our hands can come behind in order to support us on the floor. And we'll spiral the elbow pits out so that we get this nice spread open chest. And then from here, we're going to do kind of the same thing we did starting out with the spread hands. We're just going to spiral, turning the knees as far out as we can and then as far in as we can. Keeping those feet actively pulled back and the knees actively reaching down as we do it. And there's a lot of things that I kind of want to pay attention to on this. The first one is, how does this feel deep in the hip socket? I want to make sure we're not moving into pain. I want to keep this in that nice, comfortable, juicy area. Notice if one knee is harder to keep straight than the other knee, especially as you move in one particular direction. Notice if it's hard to keep the feet actively pulled back on one side compared to the other. All of these little bits of information are going to be helpful in kind of figuring out some things that might be going on that we want to work on. And I like doing a good number of reps on this. With each one, I'm seeing if we can move into each direction, the internal and external direction, a little bit more without going into pain. I like to think of this as kind of like we are loading tension back into the spring, the coiled springs of the hips in order to get them functioning a little bit better. And on the next one, as we spiral outward, now we're going to start to release the feet. We're going to do some circles with the ankles. So I'm externally spiraled as far as I can, and now we're pointing the toes, like we're trying to reach toes to the wall, spiral all the way in and pull toes back. Making a nice big circle with the ankles. I like to think of this kind of like we're flossing the ankle joint right now. Notice how all this feels around the ankle. We're still also noticing deep in the hip socket. And does one side feel a little different than the other side? One thing, notice if you're feeling a little like Charlie horse action, like do you feel cramping at the bottom of the foot, more so on one foot when you go in one direction compared to the other? And then we're going to reverse directions, doing the same thing, just going opposite direction. Continuing to make that nice big circle. Good. Then we can let the legs and hips relax just a little bit. And now I want to kind of go from our V-sit and transition into a shin box. So again, if you're dealing with hip pain, knee pain, I want to go through this slowly. So still using the hands to support. You can put one hand in front. We're going to spiral both legs in the same direction and then pull into our shin box. And then we're going to go right back out into our V, trying to get as spread as we can, and then same thing to the other side. And notice if moving in one direction from the V-sit into the shin box feels a little bit more challenging in one direction than the other direction. When I go from V into shin box in this direction, super smooth. I can do it without hands. Hips feel pretty nice and loose. As I come back, when I go the other direction, this hip's tighter, especially on internal rotation. I gotta work a little harder. Once I get into my shin box, I'm really feeling this back hip. So I want to start on the side that feels a little tighter. So now that we're in our shin box on whatever side feels more challenged, outside hand is coming down to the floor, spiraling that elbow, opening up the chest, and we're going to do some hip mobility on that back hip. Simply lifting that knee up towards the ceiling, keeping the foot in contact with the floor, feeling into this space of the front of the hip, and then bringing it right back down. I want to exhale as we squeeze. I want this to be a slow opening. I'm not throwing my knee up. I want to go very, very slow on the way up as well as the way down. And with each one, we're kind of squeezing into it, seeing if we can get a little farther with that hip or that knee as we can. After about 5 of those, we're going to go back into our V and come to the other side to do the same thing. Outside hand comes down, palm grounded, spiral elbow out, opening up the chest, and then lightly lifting that back knee up towards the ceiling. And with each one, we're squeezing a little further into it. See if you can lift a little higher on each one. Again, these are great movements to notice. How high can you lift your right knee compared to your left knee? Does one open up more than the other? Anytime we find these differences, these imbalances, it gives us some idea of the things that we need to work on. So it's really helpful to notice where our movements are limited. After 5, coming right back to our V, coming to the other side. Now that hip is already starting to loosen up. That was a lot easier for me. So now I want to get into our anterior hip. I'm still locking out that outside hand, spiraling elbow, opening up the chest. And now I want to we're pivoting through the knee, moving the hip bone forward. So in this one, I want to see how far can I get my hip bone to reach so that I start to feel some tightening up of the glute space. Inhale, let it soften. Exhale, scoop into that hip. Feel that stretch through the front of the hip space. It may go down all the way towards the knee. You may feel this more through the adductor, or you may feel it more to the outside of the hip. Where you feel it is worth noting. I don't want to make a big deal about it right at the moment, but I do want to notice where you feel it. Where are the tension patterns at? With each one that we exhale, squeeze, see if you can scoop into it just a little bit more without going into pain. And then we'll V-sit out to the other side, doing the same thing. Again, pivoting through that back knee to reach that hip bone forward on the exhale. Inhale, letting it soften. And this movement is pushing through the knee in order to move the hip forward. I'm not getting a whole lot of movement in my upper body. That's in fact why I have my palm grounded, spiraled, and lifted here so that I'm kind of locking my thoracic spine up. I can't move as much so that I can isolate just this hip. It's real common for people to move their ribs or their shoulders and not get the hip to move at all. So I want to make sure that we're pushing through that knee, moving that hip bone forward. And then we're going to come back through our V, again going all the way through to the other side. And now we're going to get into our folds. Just simply reaching out towards that knee with both hands as we exhale. Inhale, we're going to come all the way up and across to the other side. And as we go back and forth, crossing all the way through our V on each one, I want to start to notice, how does the fold feel on the right side compared to the left side? Are you able to get both hands to reach evenly, or does one hand kind of reach out ahead of the other? Are you able to get that other hand to be even with it? Notice how it feels in the glutes, specifically the leg that's in front. Is one side, do you feel a greater amount of stretch? Are you able to get as low compared to the other side? Or is one side tighter, more restricted? And then the other thing is, how does the back hip feel? Does the one side feel tighter through this space of the hip as you're folding and reaching? My left hip feels tighter in this space. That was what I was feeling as I was coming from V-sit into the shin box. And as we're kind of getting in side to side, feeling it open up a little bit more on each one. Now I want to start to play with that back hip. So as we're coming into our shin box, we can open up that back knee a little bit. Put a little bit different position, load position into that back hip. Continuing with our fold. And again, notice where that stretch feels on one side compared to the other side. Try to find the exact same hip position on each side. And if you're feeling an imbalance similar to what I'm feeling, I'm going to kind of talk this one out, because a lot of people are going to have an imbalance in the hip. It's so common. I would basically say it's kind of ubiquitous. Everybody has it. So when I'm on my right side shin box, my right hip feels pretty good. I have tightness in the adductor space, deep up in the hip socket. So I feel it here as especially the more I open this back knee up, I got a nice load pattern through that section. I'm not overloading it, but it's got enough just to kind of get it to open up a little bit. What's interesting is the connection is, as I come back and around and stretch this side, opening up this back hip, again, my right hip, not a whole lot going on. When I get into my fold, I can feel this more, I get more of a stretch on the left side glute. And what that tells me is that more than likely my entire left hip is in a state of compression comparatively to my left hip. So a little bit of what I'm doing right now is simply trying to decompress my hip. And I kind of want to, my analogy for this is thinking like a cork in a wine bottle. You screw in the cork, but then you have to kind of twist and pull, right? And that's what we're doing as we're going through these positions. We're rotating through the hip, and as I fold, that's creating pull, like I'm trying to pull that hip out of socket. When I go to the other side, now I'm getting it from the front side. And I'm just kind of easing that cork out of out of being stuck in that, really a suction cup. Because that's what happens in that hip socket is once it gets compressed, it's almost like a suction cup that keeps it compressed. We have to ease it out in those similar kind of fashion. All right, so now we're gonna get up into a half kneeling position. If you need a towel or a pad for the knees, that's perfectly fine. We're going to place the knee directly under the hip. I want the back foot tucked so the big toe is loaded, as if we're going to spring out of this position. I want to be in an active state on that back toe. And we're going to play with pelvic tilts again, but doing one side at a time. So I want to make sure head is over shoulders, over hips, over knees. We're going to let the pelvis tilt forward so that the belly kind of opens up and we get this sway in the back. And then we're going to scoop so that we feel a little stretch or length in the front of the hip. I want to inhale into the belly as the pelvis goes forward, fill up that abdominal space, and then exhale through drawing the navel into the spine as we scoop. Notice how that breath helps to add a little bit of load into that scoop. Also notice as you scoop, since we're loaded into that back toe, the more you're able to scoop, the more you feel that big toe grounded and loaded into the floor. We'll do a good 5 up to 10 reps. And then I want to switch and do the same thing on the other side. Again, load the big toe joint. Hip is directly over knee, shoulders over hip, head over shoulders. Starting with letting the pelvis go forward, belly opens up, sway in the back, scoop the pelvis, feel that light load stretch on the front of the hip. As we go forward, inhale into the belly, exhale, drawing navel into spine as we scoop. And with each one, seeing if you can get a little bit more scoop. And you feel a little bit more load at the big toe joint and the front of the hip. And how does this side feel compared to the other side? I find it more difficult to ground through my left big toe right now. It wants to kind of unload. But the more I keep it grounded, the bigger the stretch I get at it. It's not a massive stretch. It's just noticeable. And I'm feeling that nice loaded stretch through the front of the hip. Again, after 5 to 10 reps, we're going to switch back to the other side. And we're going to do the exact same thing. Scoop, breathing into the belly, pelvis goes forward, exhale, scoop. As we scoop though, now I'm going to add another layer. I got my right knee down, So as I scoop, my right hand is reaching up towards the ceiling, like I'm trying to touch the ceiling with my fingers. Then as I inhale, I'm softening my shoulder, belly goes forward. Exhale, drawing navel in as I reach, scooping at the same time. I want to feel the stretch of the scoop kind of getting drawn up into the abdominal viscera. I'm trying to lift all the way straight up. What I want to avoid on this is as I reach, I don't want to drop my opposite shoulder and side bend. I want to keep my other shoulder tall. I'm just getting higher on this shoulder. I'm not dropping on the opposite side. See if you can feel that nice length moving up into the abdominal space, into the ribs. And then we'll switch and do the same thing on the other side. Again, make sure that big toe is nicely loaded. As we scoop, adding in that reach with the exhale. Inhale, soften, exhale, scoop, and reach. Notice if one side feels more challenged, tighter, more restricted. My left side, I feel this a lot more, all the way from the big toe through the front of the hip into my reach. Again, pay attention to make sure that you're not dropping that opposite shoulder to side bend. I want to keep that shoulder at the same level. All this lift is coming from abdominal viscera up through the hand, reaching up nice and tall. All right. So now we're going to come back down to our sit, getting into an inverted sit. I want to place hands roughly around the hips, a little bit behind the hips. Palms can be fingers forward, out to the side, or back, whichever is comfortable. I like starting with mine straight out to the side, grounding through the palms. Now, if you feel like your torso is longer than your arms and you're having trouble finding the floor, it's okay to move the hands back a little bit more. I want to make sure that the palms are pressing and grounding. I don't want to be on the fingertips or on the edge of the palm. I want to be grounded all the way through the base of the palm. From here, we're going to come back to our elbow spirals. Spiraling elbow pits all the way out, and then letting them spiral all the way in. And notice how as you spiral, how that changes the shape of your shoulders. As I spiral out, my chest is opening up and we can actually lift the sternum up towards the ceiling as we're pressing down, getting nice and tall in the spine. As we spiral in, the shoulders automatically start to round up over the top of the rib cage. I want to add to that. I want to accentuate each direction. Spiraling elbows out, feel that nice open chest lifting up to the ceiling. And as we spiral in, allow the shoulders to round. Feel some stretch across the upper back. See if you can feel that nice spread stretch right through the middle of the back between the shoulder blades, somewhere in that particular region. And now I want to add our pelvis into this. So as we are externally spiraling, let the pelvis tilt forward. Belly's opening up as our chest gets tall. As we spiral internal, shoulders are rounding. Let the pelvis scoop so that as you're feeling that stretch through the upper back, see if you can also feel it start to move down into the lower back. Can you get nice and rounded through the spine? And then as you externally spiral, getting tall, can you feel it across the chest? And we can sink our breath into this movement as well. I'm inhaling as I get tall. I'm exhaling, drawing the navel in as I scoop and round. You may find that it's really difficult to sink the breath into some of these movements. If so, it's probably a good thing to kind of take notice of, because breathing patterns are things we want to work on. I'm going into a cross-leg sit, but I'm keeping my hands in the same position. I want to get into an external spiral. Elbow pits are out, chest is open, shoulder blades are drawn down and back, pressing into the floor, getting as tall as we can through the spine. We're going to do a little neck mobility from this position. So we're going to start with checking our blind spots. Looking over the right shoulder, and then looking over the left shoulder. As you're looking, I want to make sure we're keeping our head on a swivel, which means that as I turn, I don't want my head to tilt as I rotate. So I don't want to get into this position where I'm reaching with the edge of my forehead. I want to keep my spine tall, cheekbones stay on the same plane, and seeing how far can I spiral to one side compared to the other side. Notice if one direction feels tighter and more restricted. Are you able to get your chin as close to the line of your shoulder or beyond on one direction compared to the other? And I'm going to add another little layer here. As you rotate, also open your jaw nice and wide to kind of feel a stretch through the jaw, especially as you're rotating. Just a little play with the jaw, and notice if you feel a greater stretch in the jaw or the neck as you're doing this to one side compared to the other. Sometimes our neck tension has a relationship into jaw. I would actually say oftentimes, not sometimes. Then we'll come back to our center, and we're going to kind of get into our windshield wipers, dropping an ear towards the shoulder, coming back up to center, and then to the other shoulder. I want to make sure we're still pressing down, downward action. Shoulder blades are moving down the rib cage as we're dropping the ear, coming back to center, and lightly dropping the other ear. Noticing into this side of the neck space. How does it feel on the right side compared to the left side? Do you have as much range? Can you drop that ear as much on one side without the same, do you feel a greater stretch when you move in one direction compared to the other? And I'm going to add to this. So as we drop the ear, imagine you got a piece of string lifting up towards the ceiling, and feel that traction stretch in that space. We were already feeling that stretch. See if you can add to that by a little bit of a lift. It's not a lot of a lift. And going back and forth, side to side. My right side is significantly tighter on this than my left side. We are getting into some space with neck mobility where a lot of people have a tremendous amount of limitation. And this particular area creates a lot of different problems throughout the body, not just at the neck. So this is a big mobility region to work on, especially if you feel a significant difference from one side to the other. All right, so now, since we're already in our inverted position, letting the feet come back forward again, hands come to the shins, and we're going to work on our roll downs. We did worked on these last week. So roll downs, we're starting by just looking at pelvic tilt again. So from this position, we'll breathe into the belly. As we inhale, belly opens up, and it makes our spine tall. Feel that nice opening of the belly, as if we're getting that same sway in the back. And on the exhale, drawing the navel into spine, let the pelvis scoop. See if you feel some length or stretch in the low back. Now the hands are on the shins in order to help keep us from moving our shoulders backwards. So as I scoop, I don't want my shoulders to move beyond my hips. I'm keeping my shoulders elevated so that the only thing that is moving is this pelvis, and so that helps accentuate that lumbar flexion and then lumbar extension as I come back up. Shoulders are kind of remaining in place directly over the hips. With each one, see if you can scoop on that exhale a little more, actively scooping from the pelvis. Can you reach a little lower down? Can you open up the belly a little bit more forward without pain in each direction? The without pain part is very, very important here, especially if you have a tendency to have some kind of impingement, some pinchy stuff going on at the sacrum or the low back. And now I want to start to add in a little bit more through the hands. So as we scoop, start to reach the hands forward. You can even spiral the thumbs down like we're doing our bowls of soup. Let the thumb spiral, feel the shoulder blades round over the top, reaching forward. And as we come back in our inhale, spiral the palms up. Feel that opening up of the chest towards the ceiling. Scoop and reach. And as you're doing this, if you got good mobility, continue to scoop. You're reaching forward, but you're continuing to scoop. I'm reaching forward and scooping. See if you can flatten your sacrum to the floor without your feet lifting up. And then on the inhale, coming all the way back up, opening up the chest. Scoop as you reach. See if you can touch your L5 to the floor. And then coming all the way back up. Again, without the feet coming up off the floor. And we can work one vertebrae at a time, seeing how low can you come to the floor. Can you get all the way down and back up without lifting feet? Make sure we're integrating breath. I'm exhaling as I'm drawing my navel in on the way down. I'm inhaling into the belly on the way back up as I open up the chest. I want to finish off with a little bit of baby roll. So we'll come all the way down to the floor, laying on our back, arms coming overhead. I want elbows resting on the floor. So if you find that straight overhead, your arms are a little tight and stiff, it's okay to bring them out to the side to the point where the elbows rest comfortably on the floor. And from here, I want to go very slow to make sure that this is not painful on the back, but I'm keeping my both feet remain in contact with the floor. As I reach across, lifting my head, I'm reaching across the body, seeing how far can I reach my fingers without pain, without lifting up that opposite foot. As I exhale, reach. Inhale, coming back to center. Exhale, reach to the other side. As we go side to side, I want to make this reach as smooth as I can from my upper body. I'm reaching with my head and my hand. I want to try to remove any kind of push through that heel, through the foot, or lift from the opposite side. So I don't want to lift my leg in order to help me get up. I also don't want to push to help me reach. See if you can feel your lower body not active, and how far are you able to reach across, going side to side without getting the lower legs involved in the movement, other than helping them remain in contact with the floor. And notice how this feels comparatively. On the right side, related to the left side. Is one side stiffer, tighter, more restricted? I have less mobility when I reach across with my right hand. My right side low back feels tighter. Then we're going to switch and do the same thing through the legs. So I'm lifting leg and I'm reaching across the body. I want to keep my leg a little elevated. I don't want to let it drop down towards the floor because that might give me some pinch in the hip or the back. I'm reaching through the toes, and I want to make sure that my hands remain in contact with the floor. I'm not letting my hand lift up. So I'm only reaching as far as I can, maintaining some contact with the floor. Inhale back to center, same thing across to the other side. And I want to see how smooth can I roll across from one side, reaching those toes like I'm trying to touch the wall with the toes, getting as long as I can from fingertip to toe tip. How smoothly can I go across to the other side? How does the right side feel compared to the left side? Is one side more restricted than the other? Again, I feel it more on this right side. It's not a lot, but it's there. And we can come back to our center, bring our feet back flat to the floor. And I want to put one hand on our chest and the other hand on our belly. And I want to bring some breaths down into that belly space. I want to feel the hand on the belly rise. On the inhale, exhale, drawing navel into spine so you feel that hand lower. See if you can breathe in through that lower hand. Make the lower hand move without the upper hand moving. Starting out, I don't want to breathe into the chest space. I only want to breathe into the belly space. Full inhale in, full exhale out. Can you feel stretch through the belly? And as we're breathing in, I want to make sure that we're not just breathing up, but also breathing out through the side body and even down into the low back. You can kind of feel the low back spread out against the floor on that inhale. You're even allowed to have a little soft pelvic tilt. On the inhale, pelvis will tilt a little forward. That's going to lift the low back up off the floor, but we're still breathing into that space to see if we can stay connected. And as we exhale, feeling that scoop. And now I want to add in the chest. So now as we're breathing in, continuing to fill in that belly space, but also allow that chest to rise and expand. So now both hands kind of rise on the inhale and soften on the exhale. And just like what we did with the lower core, as we're breathing into the chest, it's not just that I want the chest to rise, I want to breathe in through the side and through the upper back, feeling that spread of the back against the floor. This breathing can feel really, really challenging if you're new to it, especially if the breath is a little out of sync, which is very, very common. And if the breath is out of sync, then this is an important place for us to put some focus of our practice, our movement into, and work on this kind of several times throughout the day. Because the more we can sync our breath is the platform of which all movement takes place. And if our breath is out of sync, then we are moving on an unstable platform. So I want to get that platform back into sync. Have a stable platform on which we can explore the world more safely. And the last few breaths, notice if there's any tension around the neck, upper shoulders, ribs, down into the low back. And then just be soft with that breath, bringing some breath into those areas that might feel tense, filling them up. And on the exhale, seeing if you can let that tension go. Let it just fall away into the floor. And on the inhale, filling back up into it. Exhale, let it release. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes, get up slowly. To get up, I'm going to suggest rolling to your side and easily pushing up off the floor.